What is the optimal way of playing Rainbow? That is the question every Pro League team is trying to answer. And looking at the diversity in Pro League gameplay, it seems like there is little to no consensus. So in this video, I'm going to pretend to be a coach and talk about what I consider to be the optimal playstyle for my team. But to do that, we need to start a bit earlier. If you've watched a few of my videos, you might know that I like to think about strategies in terms of stages. For every attack, there are certain sub-objectives that need to be completed in order to complete the main objective, which is winning the round. Let's take a Claphouse CC attack for example, where we want to play a garage take. The first stage is to breach CC wall. The second stage is to get garage control, and the third stage is the execute. And for me, the optimal way of playing the game is to have a specific plan for each and every stage. I want my team to be structured and organized. I want everyone to have a clear idea of what they're supposed to be doing right now and what they're supposed to be doing 30 seconds from now. And here I can already see your comments. Siege is a complex game with many different variables, so there's no way you can effectively solve every situation by following just one plan, right? But in reality, not every round of Siege is unique. And that's even more true for Pro League Siege. I mean, just think about what it means to have a meta. It means that there are certain strategies that are better than others, and are consequently used more often. On this Claphouse CC attack, for example, 90% of all rounds play out exactly the same. When it comes to getting garage control, for example, there's always going to be a defender on rafters. He will always have at least one ADS, and he will always be supported by a cash player holding the stairs angle. So in that situation, it just makes sense to have a plan before you go into the match. I mean, why would you invest brain power into solving a problem during the round when you can also have the solution ready beforehand? And here, it is important to point out that I'm not talking about high-level plans such as nading the rafters player. I'm talking about a specific set of instructions on how to nade the rafters player. Who is going to flash? Who is going to throw the nade? Who is going to watch which runout? These are the questions that I want to answer before the game has even started, so that once we are in the game, we can just concentrate on the execution. That's a luxury that flexible teams just don't have, because they need to spend time coming up with a solution on the fly. And again, in my opinion, there is no point in wasting time solving a problem that you've already solved before. Now, you could say that I chose a bit of an unfair example. I mean, after all, that whole garage situation is what I usually refer to as a minigame. It's a situation in which there isn't really a lot of interaction between attackers and defenders. Most of the time there isn't even a proper gunfight. And of course, playing according to a plan always looks nice when the opponents aren't doing anything to disrupt the plan. So how do I envision my playstyle in a more open-ended situation? Let's say during the third stage of the attack, the execute. The first thing I want to point out is that these situations are, again, rarely unique. The defenders always have at least one player in cash, and they always have a player on cash stairs. And then they're going to have a player in construction, or maybe one below. If you take a look at Pro League games, that's exactly what you're going to see. So 90% of the time, we know where the defenders are, and we know what they're trying to do. And this, once again, gives us something that we can plan for. Of course, the biggest challenge of making a plan in this situation is the fact that we are 2 minutes deep into the round, and we can't just assume that our sledge, for example, is still alive. So the natural consequence is that the plan is not going to be as specific anymore. But that doesn't mean it's not going to be valuable. I mean, just think about all the different options that the attackers have available here. You could play 1 breach, 3 garage, 1 window. Or maybe 2 breach, 1 garage, 1 window and 1 below. Or anything in between. And here it's pretty obvious that not all of them have the same win rate. Some setups are just better than others. And instead of trying to figure that out during the round, we can just put in the effort beforehand. But unlike before when we talked about clearing garage, I'm not talking about anything super specific here. In this situation, the plan would only answer fairly simple questions. Do we plant or do we go for kills? Assuming we go for kills, what are the 5 best positions to be in and who should push in first? And that's pretty much it already. As you can see, I'm not trying to micromanage the entire game, especially not when we are that deep into the round. I'm just trying to make sure that my team is prepared to deal with the kind of situations that happen over and over again. As long as the defenders aren't doing anything out of the ordinary, my team will always know what to do next. They will never stall out, and they will never waste time waiting for a rotation. Okay, so that was the core idea. In 90% of the rounds, the defenders are going to play a setup that we've seen countless times already. And instead of trying to come up with the best solution on the spot, like a flexible team would, we do most of the problem solving before the game has even started, so that during the game we can just focus on the execution. But there are of course some problems with this philosophy. The two biggest ones are probably A, what happens in the other 10% of rounds where we don't know what the defenders are doing, and B, what happens when your plan fails. Because obviously, just because you have a plan doesn't mean it's always going to work out. Think about an attack where you are trying to clear roamers, for example. If the defenders decide to aggressively fight, there is not much you can do about that. No plan in the world eliminates the need to win 1v1 gunfights. And if there are 1v1 gunfights, it means that some of the time you're going to be down a player. So what do I want my team to do in that situation? First of all, my kind of plans don't immediately fail just because one player died. Remember how I talked about how it's important to figure out the 5 best positions during every stage? Well, if you know the optimal positions, you also know which position is the least important. So if you're down a player, you just ignore that one. Oftentimes, it's still possible to follow the spirit of the plan. You just have to make some concessions. When you're playing a roam clear, for example, that might mean not having a cutoff player anymore. That's unfortunate, but it's also not the end of the world. And it's important to realize that this is not a problem unique to structured teams, right? If you're a flexible team, you can also lose a player during the roam clear. And I'd argue that structured teams are actually better off in that situation, because they thought about the least and most important positions, which makes it a lot easier to adapt to the new circumstances. Now, of course, there are also going to be situations where the plan literally just fails. Maybe because the defenders are playing something new, or maybe because you have lost 2 or 3 key operators early on in the round. In that situation, you don't have a choice but to become a flexible team again. You have to thoroughly understand your situation, you have to be looking for openings, and you have to find the solution on the spot. And in that situation, you could argue that a truly flexible team is a bit better off. After all, they are of course used to those kind of situations. And generally, I would agree. That is one of the shortcomings of being a structured team. But at the same time, just because you're playing in a structured team doesn't mean you suddenly lose the ability to think creatively. The world isn't black or white like that. In fact, I think that structure and flexibility are not necessarily on opposite ends of the spectrum. It is possible to be flexible while following a structure. When you're playing according to your plan, you might not be actively looking for openings, but you're still going to see some. And then, it's totally fine to break away from the plan in order to capitalize. In fact, I would encourage it. I mean, just think about why we are following a plan in the first place. We do it because it's helpful to guide us through the round, as long as nothing out of the ordinary happens. But if the defenders make an unexpected mistake, that is something out of the ordinary. So there is no point in following the plan anymore. It's just that the existence of a plan guarantees that you are not dependent on finding an opening. And in my opinion, that's one of the main advantages of being a structured team. Okay, so now we've talked about what happens when things aren't going according to the plan. But assuming that they are, doesn't that kind of imply that all of our rounds are going to look very similar? And doesn't that expose us to the risk of being counter-threaded? The short answer is yes. The long answer is, I never said anything about having only one plan. What I have described so far might seem very familiar if you remember Team Empire's playset in year 4. During that year, they were incredibly successful with literally playing the same strat every single attack. The problem was that the other teams eventually caught on, and the fact that they only ever played one strat led to their downfall. But of course, nothing forces you to only have one strat. Rainbow is a game that allows you to complete your objectives in multiple different ways. So we can just come up with multiple different plans for every stage. On that Garrett side CC execute, for example, we can have one plan for when we're trying to go for kills, where we have this positioning, for example, and then we can have a different plan for when we're trying to plant, again with different positioning. And we can do the same thing for all the other stages of that strategy. When it comes to opening CC wall, for example, we'll have one plan for the optimal way of using Zofia stuns to deny bandit tricks, and then we'll have another plan for the optimal way of using nades to deny bandit tricks. And this is why thinking about strategies in terms of stages is so important. When I think about strategies, I don't think about one rigid set of instructions that guide you through the entire round. Instead, I think about the individual parts that make up the strategy. And that is what I call modular siege. For every stage, there are going to be 2 or more modules that the team can choose from in order to clear the stage. And if we approach the game with that mindset, we are actually much more flexible than you might think. Sure, within every module, we are pretty rigid. If we decide to plant on a CC execute, it's going to look more or less the same every time we do it. But we are flexible in the sense that we don't need to plant. If the conditions aren't right, we have an alternative. And this also decreases the risk of being counter-stratted. If the defenders are running Smoke, Tachanka and C4s because they want to counter our plant, then we'll just not plant. So modular siege is decently flexible, it is not easy to counter, and most importantly, it guarantees that our macro decision making is always as close as possible to optimal. Or at least as close to what we think is optimal. Of course, no one truly understands siege, so every plan we make is going to be non-optimal in some shape or form. But that's not an argument against planning. You should still try, because everything else is just a glorified coin flip. Alright, that is the essence of the philosophy behind my playstyle. Sadly, this mindset doesn't seem to have widespread support in Pro League at the moment, especially not in EU. But to be honest, with every EU game that I watch, I become more and more convinced that every team would be better off if they did just a little more planning, at the very least when it comes to dealing with minigames. And again, my philosophy is not about micromanaging each and every second of a round. I just want to build a framework that guides you through all the situations that regularly occur in a game of Siege. And yeah, that's not a sexy playstyle. It's much cooler to be in a flexible team that is solving every problem on the fly. But that is also terribly inconsistent. Because if you don't find the openings that you're looking for, you're just forced to take random gunfights. And if there's one thing I really hate, it's unnecessary randomness. That's why my playstyle is pretty much the exact opposite. As long as nothing weird happens, there is going to be a clear idea behind every single decision. It's a bit like that nerd who learns the entire textbook by heart. But you know what? That gets the job done. I honestly believe that this is the best way to play Siege. And I also think that most Pro League teams would benefit from incorporating at least some of those ideas. Alright, that's it for the video. I hope that this dive into how I think about Rainbow was interesting to you. If you're wondering why I haven't talked about defense, that's mainly because the video would have been twice as long if I did that. But also, I seem to have a weird bias towards attacking. I think attacking is much more interesting than defending. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope you learned something new, and thanks for watching.